to share them with people.
Yes, and let's delve in here with your book. I've got a picture of it here. Please share why Star Wars. This is the question that's on my mind.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, partially it's just a way to use something that people are familiar with and that they're already find engaging, and use that as a way to share topics that may be new to them. Concepts of consciousness and spirituality and universal principles, universal truths, but using a medium that they're already familiar with and fond of. I'm a fan of Star Wars. I have been since I was a kid. There are a lot of very deep philosophical, spiritual themes in there, and that was very much George Lucas's intent, which is clear from various quotes he's given. He very much had a philosophical mindset, a very universal perspective in mind when he gave birth to the Star Wars franchise. But partially it's just a way to use a medium that people are excited about and use that as a way to share new principles.
And did you find that as you were researching it, because you were saying before we came on that it's taken you quite a while to gather all of the information, and how that must have shifted over time when you first began, and then when you're publishing, it's kind of like, oh, actually, I don't need that now. I'll put this in. And how did your understanding of consciousness, did that shift and grow through writing the book?
I don't know if I would say it shifted my overall worldview, but it did give me a chance to go more deeply, both into Star Wars and the significance behind some of the scenes, but also into some of the religious and philosophical traditions that have very strong parallels to Star Wars. So,
Yeah.
My background is the Vedic tradition, so the ancient Indian tradition of knowledge. But I also got to explore in this book religions and philosophies from around the world, Eastern, Western, and even Native American and First Nations cultures. So it was fun to be able to delve into those traditions as well, and to see those same parallels coming up again and again.
Yes. And isn't it powerful how the brain, we learn with symbols and symbology and imagery, and how Star Wars has such strong imagery. Even if we're not listening to the audio of the movie, the imagery is so powerful. And how do you feel, and because that was made pre-AI, and now our awareness is becoming much more expanded and opened with AI and robots and outer space beings and all of that kind of there's an opening, isn't there? I mean, I only have to go onto YouTube and I see that there are videos about these topics. How do you feel about this, about AI, in terms of how that can assist us or not on our spiritual journey?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say it's a tool, and tools can be used well or they can be misused, any tool you can think of. And so it's a very complex, very powerful tool. Even just something like the internet is amazing, the level of research it can allow us to do, but it also has, the potential to lead down very dark, negative paths if you take certain turns on the internet. So, something like AI, if it can increase our efficiency, our productivity, that kind of thing, is great. But, also if it starts taking over our lives in a way that starts to undermine meaning, then we have a bit of a problem. So I think it's just something we have to use thoughtfully.
Yes. And what about outer space beings? I'm interested in your thoughts on that because of the
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I would say, it seems extremely unlikely to me that in such a vast, complex universe that there aren't other intelligent life forms. I just think, statistically speaking, logically speaking, that there must be. So, in my writings and my focus, I tend to focus more on human beings and their development, cultivating higher states of consciousness for human beings. But, regardless, I do think we live in a very complex universe, and there probably is a lot of validity to the other beings living in other parts of the universe.
I love how you've brought the book forwards and uncovered or revealed for us 18 truths that are in alignment with the story of Star Wars. What would you say what are your top 3 of these truths?
Well, I don't know if I have a prepared list, but I'll list a few.
Okay. Just that come to mind.
Yeah.
3 that come to mind. There we go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of them would be that there is an all-pervading level of reality that's beyond the physical senses. So in Star Wars, that would be the Force. That would be this thing that's everywhere. It's pervading everything. It connects everything in the universe. It binds everything together, holds the universe together. In the Vedic tradition, that would be called pure consciousness or eternal bliss consciousness, but a level of universal consciousness, an intelligence that's underlying everything, that pervades everything. And then you see very similar concepts, even in Western traditions, more of an abstract notion of God, so this all omnipresent, all pervading being. And even in Native American traditions, so a great spirit. So the first one would be that there is this all-pervading level of reality that's beyond the senses. So there's more to life than just the physical world. There's something else, something deeper going on. And then the second one would be that we can tap into that through meditation. We do see the Jedi meditating in some of the movies. We can tap into that through meditation, through other spiritual practices, and enliven that level of reality in our lives. Use the Force, if you want to use Star Wars terminology, and in that way live in a more purposeful manner. So those are some of the first ones that come to mind.
And now more than ever, we are being kind of pushed and pulled to use these principles, which are the basis of the basis of religious science, definitely, and new thought and science of mind, that there is a power, a force for good, a power and a presence that's overarching, overriding, one omnipresence, and we can use it. It's so powerful, isn't it, to know that we are powerful beings and that we can use this thing. Why do you think that this now, even more so, is coming out in consciousness? More and more people are becoming aware of this.
It's a good question. I mean, in the Vedic tradition, they talk about yugas. So these are extremely long periods of time. And different yugas are associated with different levels of consciousness. From a Vedic standpoint, we're in an age overall of some darkness and some ignorance, Kali Yuga. But at the same time, there seems to be this movement towards coming out of some of that ignorance, coming out of some of that darkness, and that seems to be a shift that's happening very quickly. From a Vedic standpoint, it's all playing out in its proper time, I suppose. Yeah.
How far are we into Kali Yuga?
I think you'd find different different teachers would give you completely different answers on that. So I don't think I can give you an authoritative answer.
However, we're in it.
Yes, but there are also I've heard a number of Vedic teachers and a lot of spiritual teachers talking about some upcoming period of brightness, of clarity, of coming out of some of that darkness. So there does seem to be some sort of shift happening.
And the Vedic tradition, the Vedic teachings they can be used and looked at from so many different standpoints, that in a way it's a worldview. It is a worldview that can be overlaid onto whatever religion we think, or spiritual bias, or whatever we prefer, whatever we use. The Vedic tradition has so many teachings that we can use in our everyday life. I mean, it really is. It does emulate oneness, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It has a very universal perspective. So when I'm talking about the Vedic tradition, I'm not just talking about, one culture, one narrative, one kind of narrow perspective on things. It has a very universal perspective. It says in the Rig Veda, which is one of the oldest Vedic texts, reality is one, the wise speak of it in different ways. So there is this underlying level of reality, level of life that holds true across the world in all locations, traditions, religions, etc. But based on our cultural context, we use slightly different words to describe it. But it's the same universal reality wherever you are.
And what drew you to the Vedic tradition?
I grew up in a family of meditators, and I read books on Indian philosophy with my dad when I was a kid, and we discussed them around the dinner table, and I was just fascinated. So that dovetailing with the experiences gained through meditation, it really developed a passion for the subject. And so later on, I went to study it.
And have you been to India?
I actually have not. Well, my focus is very much on the more universal aspects of it, so it's not
Yeah,
specifically tied to Indian culture, although I have great respect for that culture and, think it has many
right.
beautiful elements. My dad actually went to India when he was a young man, and it completely changed his life, but then I kind of grew up in the context of both
Yes.
his and my mom's, association with the Indian teachings, so that philosophical context was there, even if
Was
it
there already, it was ingrained in
exactly.
you. And what do you believe, how do you believe meditation can change our lives, if it can at all?
Absolutely. I think it allows you to tap into that underlying level of reality, that pure consciousness, that unmanifest, that force, if you want to use Star Wars terms, and to enliven that in your life, and to just naturally act more and more in accordance with the evolutionary tendencies of this universe. So, to grow, to evolve towards your full potential as a human being, to evolve towards higher levels of consciousness in a very natural way. So yeah, it's a powerful tool, and there have been many studies as well from this, talking from a more scientific angle. Many studies talking about the benefits of various meditation techniques. So it seems like on multiple levels, this is a very beneficial tool, whether someone's coming at it from a more physicalistic perspective or from a more spiritual perspective.
And even if it's from a mindfulness perspective, to close down, be in the silence, and be in that space of solitude without even any agenda other than calming the nervous system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I do transcendental meditation. There are many different types. I think many of them have
Yes.
benefits. Certainly for transcendental meditation, it's a very innocent, very natural practice where you don't go into it with any particular goal. It's just a very simple
Yes.
process, and it just allows the mind to settle inward to that state. So, again, I think many styles have benefits, and it's not just a matter of trying to aim for some particular benefit. It's often a matter
Right.
of just letting the mind go inward to where it naturally wants to go, to this level of quietness and peace inside.
Yes. And do you think that there's a required amount of meditation, like time wise? Do you think it's almost like kind of powering up with a plug, isn't it, every day? I like to meditate at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. But I know that if I had that space, I would probably be meditating a lot more during the day as well.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the technique. The So different styles of meditation have different effects on the brain. So many of them have benefits, but
Right.
they're completely different benefits. So a lot of it just depends on what technique you're practicing. But I do think that regularity of practice is very important. That regular plugging in, as you say, just to
Yes.
allow the physiology to become more acclimated to that, to be able to support the experiences gained through meditation more and more in everyday life, and not just during the actual session.
Yes. So that it's not about what we're doing in meditation, it's about how we're living our lives in those spaces in between. Yeah, responding, how we respond to what comes up. Yeah. And so your book, I mean, you're inspired by your work and the Vedic tradition, and you are a professor, as I shared that at the beginning in the bio. What do you love about teaching, Dr. Krista? What is it about teaching that you love?
I think being able to connect with people and discuss things that are really meaningful. Probably
Mm,
my favorite part of teaching is the webinars, and I try to get the students very involved in them, because
yes.
I really enjoy that back and forth dialogue. I love the questions that students ask. It just allows us to go much more deeply into the material. It makes it more relevant to the students. So I love the stimulation of the live webinars. But even just written forums, I love some of the topics that come up. It's neat that because we're talking about these deep subjects that matter to all people, I think, to all humans.
Yes.
I think it allows people to connect, even though they may be different ages, different backgrounds. It doesn't matter. It's just because they're talking about something that's such a profound part of every human being. Suddenly, you don't notice the superficial differences between us, and you can just connect on that profound level.
Yes. Because we all have, I mean, I don't want to make a generalized statement here. However, there are those universal questions, aren't there? Why am I here? What is my purpose? How did I get here? Um, those questions that are really powerful when we delve into them, to start realizing that we're not like we're not one on our own having these questions. We're all wondering on some level what this life is all about and what our part in it is. I'm interested, do you think watching Star Wars or reading your book, Star Wars book, could bring us closer to answering some of those questions?
Oh, I certainly hope so.
Mm.
Laying out the 18 universal truths that come up both in Star Wars and in all these religious philosophical traditions. I think those principles that come out, I think they're directly related to some of those really deep questions that we have, and many traditions across the world. Once you get past some of the very superficial differences on the surface, where there seems to be tension, they do provide answers to these questions. I don't know if your audience is already familiar with the analogy of the blind men and the elephant. Would that be helpful for me to mention?
Yeah, please share it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes. So in this analogy, there's a group of blind individuals, and they want to know what an elephant is like. So they go and find one, and they each touch a different part of it. So one person touches the trunk of the elephant, but they're blind, so they can't see it. And they say, "Oh, okay. So an elephant is kind of like a snake. It's like long and narrow, and kind of twists and turns." And another person touches its ear and says, "Oh, what are you talking about? The elephant, it's actually flat like a fan, it's wide." And then another one touches the elephant's leg and they say, "Oh no, the elephant is like a tree trunk. It's very strong and sturdy." And so they're all accurately describing part of the elephant, but they're also missing the big picture because they're saying, no, it's just the trunk, or it's just the ear, or it's just the leg. And so that analogy has been applied to different religions and philosophies, where they're all trying to discover this whole universal truth, this universal reality of the elephant, but they're looking at it from their own particular angle, particular perspective.
Yes.
And so when you can look at those principles within the traditions that give you a glimpse of the whole elephant and not just one part, then you can start to have a sense of what are these universal truths and how do they answer these deep questions that all of us have.
That's really powerful. And then how can that, in our everyday lives, how do you see that that can help us to live better lives, or to live more not better, I don't want to use that word, more fulfilling lives, more meaning, with more a life with more meaning? Because I think that's the one thing where most of us are seeking, a meaningful life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say that most religious philosophical traditions teach that life is purposeful in some regard, that there is some sort of overarching purpose, some sort of evolutionary direction. And so the more that we're aligned with that evolutionary direction, the more happy, the more fulfilled we will be. And so it's you can use the analogy of a river. It's like life is a river that's leading towards an ocean of truth. But as people on the river, we can either paddle with that river or against it. We can get caught in snags along the way. We can get caught in eddies. We can resist that evolutionary tendency of life. And so on an everyday level, it just boils down to every decision we make can either further our evolution or inhibit it. If we're acting in a healthy, positive, constructive manner, we're paddling towards that goal, towards that ocean of truth. And, at times when we're resisting that natural evolutionary tendency, then we're resisting that part of life. And then life tends to become a little bit more rough until we get back on track. So I would say it just inspires us to be very, very careful, not from a fearful sense, but just in understanding that life has value and has a purpose, and the better we can align our actions with that purpose, the more fulfilled we will be, and also the more fulfillment we can bring to those around us.
So really getting to know our individual values and living into those values.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it too. From a Vedic standpoint, there's this concept of dharma. That's Dharma, which you already know, but for your audience, and dharma is, well, ultimately it's the evolutionary flow of nature, the evolutionary flow of life itself. But it also has an individual aspect where each of us has our own dharma, our own path that's natural to us, and that's very much aligned with our individual tendencies, our individual gifts. So the more we're expressing those gifts, those tendencies, the more we're acting in accordance with our individual dharma, and the more we're helping the entire universe evolve towards in its dharmic direction as well.
Right. So individually, we have this amazing opportunity to live our fullest lives and following our dharma, knowing when it's off, when we don't feel right, or when things aren't going as we seemingly, there are challenges always in our lives. What do you think about that, Dr. Krista, when these like big life challenges happen, that things that really kind of pull the rug maybe from us? What can we turn to in the Vedic tradition that can a practice or a knowing, or what would you recommend or suggest to bring us back to that knowing of deep inner peace, and that actually we are loved and we are safe and there is a way through this?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things is just by getting back to a healthier routine. It sounds very basic, but just making
Right.
sure we're well rested, that we have time for meditation and spiritual practices, that we exercise, that we eat well. It sounds very basic, but our physiology is what we're experiencing this life through. And the more pure it is, the better it can support these higher states of awareness that we can cultivate over time. So part of it is just very practical in that regard. But certainly we can also turn to texts, to teachings, to the lives of great men and women and individuals who resonate with us, to find that inspiration, to find those principles that inspire us to get back on track, to live more authentically based on our individual dharma and more in alignment with cosmic dharma.
And I think even though you said it sounds very basic, that sometimes can take time after there's been something happen in our lives or a shock, or it can take time to get back to that basic place of looking after health and, from a holistic perspective. So I think that's a big task. And then keeping that going the whole time.
Definitely. Yeah. Simple answer, but not always simple to achieve. Yes.
Yeah. So how do you see your book? I mean, how do you see your book kind of panning out? What's the big message that is the takeaway from your book that you would like people to really hold in their hearts for how they can live a more meaningful life by reading your book? I'm going to put the book back up here, by the way.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say, yes, I would say, well, different things come to mind. One is that there are these universal truths that can be found in many different cultures, and we can find a lot of inspiration from them. But another is just, again, the existence of a reality beyond the physical senses, beyond the physical world, or not contained by the physical world. And that the more we tap into that through meditation, through other practices, the more meaningful our lives can become. And, yeah.
I'd love for you, while we're here, to share your understanding of Satchitananda. I think you touched on it earlier a little without saying it. I'd really love you to inspire me and the audience with your understanding of it.
Sure, I'd love to.
Thank
So Satchitananda, you probably know some of this, but for your audience, Satchitananda means eternal bliss consciousness. And so that's a Vedic term, a Sanskrit term. And it's referring to this unmanifest level of reality, the state of pure consciousness or pure awareness. That's the basis not only of the individual mind, the individual thoughts and emotions and perceptions, but also the basis of the entire world. So there's this level of reality, of intelligence, of consciousness that underlies everything. And again, it has this inherently blissful nature. So when we do meditation or other spiritual practices that can allow the mind to settle down beyond the surface levels of thought, deeper and deeper and deeper, eventually the mind reaches this state of just eternal bliss consciousness, where there are no thoughts, there are no emotions, there are no perceptions. There's just this deep, deep state of bliss and peace. And so from a Vedic perspective, the entire play and display, the entire evolution and progression of the universe is ultimately the display of this bliss and this consciousness playing itself out, giving rise to human nervous systems, and then human nervous systems allowing us to turn inward, to meditate, to experience our source, our essential nature, our self. I'm covering a lot of abstract topics there. Should I break
Mm.
that down in any way for your audience?
Well,
I
I
know.
think it's great. I'm what's coming through for me is that anyway, and at any point, then we have this amazing opportunity to reach that place within us through meditation, through mindfulness, through releasing the need to run our lives on um, maybe some call it the ego or negative thoughts or limitation, that we can open up and expand into this.
No, I think that's a great
Yeah,
takeaway.
yeah,
Because again, from a Vedic perspective, it is our essential nature. It's who we are on the deepest level. So it's
right.
never something alien or separate from us. It's just a matter of having the time to get past those superficial stresses that can cloud our awareness and get back to our own essential self.
So when stuff happens that we don't like or that we don't think is bliss filled, what do we do then, Dr. Noble?
Well, again, the practices I think are so important, but also there is this element of I do think it's powerful to shift our focus to the positive. I don't think
Yeah.
that means just ignoring or
No.
dismissing. I think there's a value in acknowledging the negative and what we're dealing with, and in taking what lessons we can from that in ways to improve our own lives or other people's lives, the world around us. That's all very valid. But I do think at the end of the day, if we keep our focus shifted more toward the positive, it can help us to take advantage of that natural evolutionary tendency of life and live the best lives possible.
And it's so beautiful to know that there are these tools and practices that we can use in any moment.
Absolutely.
Wow. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. I'd like to invite you for just for a couple of minutes to maybe share with the audience anything around how we can, in these times, how we can more fully live into our Dharma, and how to recognize when things are off in our lives or when things are going great in our lives. Is this really our Dharma, or is this the mind telling us that we're kind of tricking ourselves? And how we can live that meaningful life moment by moment in the simplicity of life.
Sure. Well, in
Yeah,
terms of discovering what our dharma is, dharmic action that's suited to us, there's usually a feel of naturalness and flow to it. There's a
right.
joy to it. Oftentimes, we might even lose awareness of the small self when we're doing it, of the ego, of the small self, not by trying to. For instance, for myself, I love to write. And often when I'm writing, I get so immersed in that process that I forget
Okay.
about Krista Noble. I forget about all those, superficial aspects of who I am. I'm just in the flow of that process. And so I think different people have different activities that bring out that natural flow in them, and they feel um, very much aligned with their inner self when they're doing those activities. So I think, it's not to say that the minute there's the slightest challenge, you should just give up on whatever you're doing, of course, but
Right.
it's just to say that there's some quiet, natural draw to certain activities that are very much aligned with our inner nature, and
Okay.
especially the more calm, more peaceful, the more we've cultivated those qualities in our life through rest, through meditation, through healthy practices, the more we're aware and attuned to moments when we feel very much in the flow, very much like we're doing something that's natural and wholesome for us specifically. And that could be on the level of a hobby. It could be on the level of a career, a particular job. It could be on the level of a relationship with another person, a marriage, a child, something like that, parenthood. But just those activities that bring this natural sense of flow, where there's not so much strain, there's not so much struggle and resistance, but more a sense of, even if on the surface there could be some complications, more of a sense of, no, I'm completely equipped to handle this because I'm just being true